Welcome to Principal Center Radio, helping you build capacity for instructional leadership. Here's your host, Director of the Principal Center, Dr. Justin Bader.
Welcome everyone to Principal Center Radio. I'm your host, Justin Bader, and I'm honored to welcome back to the program Erik Palmer. Erik is a professional speaker and education consultant from Denver, Colorado, whose passion for speaking has been part of every one of his multiple careers. After several years in the business world, he became a teacher, spending 21 years in the classroom, primarily as an English teacher, but also as a teacher of math, science, and civics. The author of several books, Palmer presents frequently at conferences and has given keynotes and led in-service training in school districts across the United States and around the world. He focuses on giving teachers practical, engaging ways to teach oral communication skills and showing education leaders how to be more effective communicators. He's the author of Before You Say a Word, A School Leader's Guide to Clear and Compelling Communication, which we've talked about previously here on Principal Center Radio. And he's the author of Well Spoken, Teaching Speaking to All Students, now in its second edition, which we're here to talk about today.
And now, our feature presentation.
Erik, welcome back.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I really enjoyed our conversation about communication for school leaders and understanding, how we can be more effective as communicators. And I'm excited to talk about this book on actually teaching speaking to students. How did you get into this? How did you develop an interest in teaching speaking to students? Because, having interviewed more than 400 people for this podcast, I have to say you're possibly the only person who is currently speaking and writing about this. So how did you get into this?
That still scares me that I'm the only one talking about the number one language art, oral communication. But I was the kid who was in debate and forensics in high school. And then I went to college. I went to Southern Methodist University, boy howdy. And I was on the debate team there. And they would fly me around the country to argue. So I went after that to University of Denver Law School because I thought I would spend my life arguing. Veered off and went into the business world, as you mentioned. But I was in a highly verbal business, commodity trading. I ran a commodity brokerage office, had a seat on a Chicago commodity exchange. So my whole life, speaking was important. Now then when my kids were born, I said, I think I like kids more than money. So I went into education, took a little bit of a pay cut. Okay, 85% pay cut. But I went into education and I taught a 5th, 6th grade class to start with. And I was on a team of 6 teachers. And the other 5 teachers said, well, we do a book report every quarter on a different genre. Meaning, of course, that as the new guy, I should do a book report every quarter on a different genre. The kids got up in October, 5th and 6th graders, gave their book reports, and they were terrible. I couldn't believe how polite my class was. They all clapped. And I thought, really, she just destroyed a great book. And I went back to the teacher meeting and I said, what's going on here? These kids, they're terrible. They said, yeah, that's just how kids speak. So that is how they speak, but it's not how they can speak. Where are the materials that we have to teach speaking skills? And I got these blank stares. And we had basal readers, we had novel sets, we had a science kit, we had math books, we had something called daily oral language, we had a spelling program. I said, where are the materials for teaching speaking? Nothing. That's true of everyone listening. If they went to their teacher center and looked for materials about how to teach speaking, there's nothing unless they've already had me come to their district. So I wanted to develop a way to teach kids how to speak well. And at the time, multiple trait writing was coming into vogue. We weren't giving papers just one grade. We said, well, writing involves word choice, mechanics, content, organization. I said, I want to do that for speaking. What are the specific skills of speaking? Let me break it down for kids and come up with a way to teach them how to speak well. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, I remember being a teacher in Washington State, and I think initially we had a listening assessment, but I don't think we had anything on speaking. And then eventually the listening assessment was done away with because that was perceived as, not especially rigorous or meaningful. But I think it would be difficult to argue that speaking is not an important skill. I mean, any adult probably would recount a similar experience to yours of needing speaking ability and speaking skills constantly in the adult world. So what explains the blind spot in education? Why do we not take this seriously as something that we should teach?
That's such a great question. And I've struggled with that for years. Why do people miss this? It is by far the number one language art. It is the key to professional and social success. I think, we think that kids can already speak. I mean, they come into your class, they can talk, and so I guess we don't have to teach it, right? But that would be like saying, can you do 2 plus 2? Ah, well, then you already know math. No. Can you write a sentence? Well, then you already know how to write. But somehow speaking, we treat differently. The second thing is no one taught us, so we don't know how to teach others. And when I ask people, what does it take? What are the skills of an effective speaker? They don't know because no one taught us. And so here's the thing that all of education depends upon, and all of professional and social success depends upon oral communication. And somehow we overlook it. We talk about reading and writing, as if it's one word, reading and writing. But if you go to the National Council of Teachers of English Conference, there are 0 sessions about the number one language art, speaking. And so it mystifies me. Anytime I go to some district and say, hey, this is important, I get an immediate, oh my gosh, you're right. And oh my gosh, now that I listen with new ears, they don't speak well. We have shortchanged them in a very big way.
Eric, part of me wonders if our blindness to this issue stems from social class. That if you are, middle class or upper class, you learn to speak from your parents. You imitate your parents. No teacher pulls you aside and explicitly, tells you how to speak. And as educators, it's easy to miss the fact that this is something that we actually can teach in schools, and it's probably a pretty big creator of opportunity if we do. What do you think of that? Is there an assumption that we don't need to teach it because we ourselves were not explicitly taught in school how to speak?
Well, there's an assumption, as I say, we don't need to teach it because everybody can speak. And I don't think it's a class thing or a cultural thing because everybody speaks. And the key to speaking well is the same in any culture, in any language, in any class. Yes, there's such a thing as code switching. And I speak differently in the dugout when I'm playing baseball with my old guy baseball team than I do in the classroom. So there is such a thing. But the skills of effective speaking are true across the board. And it's just that we don't exactly know what those skills are. And so we haven't taught them. We know that kids don't speak well. And that, again, is not cultural dependent. It's true everywhere. But we don't exactly know how to fix that. And that's where I came in with the ideas that are in well spoken.
Let's get into some of those ideas then, because you said just as people might have seen 5 or 6 trait writing, different criteria that we're looking for in good writing and that we're teaching, you said there are traits to speaking. How do you break speaking down into various, categories of skill?
One thing I always do when I do a workshop is I start and say, tell me what the skills are of effective speaking. Invariably, someone will say, well, good speakers speak slowly and loudly, which is horrible advice. You would hate it if I spoke slowly and loudly. You would hate it. People say good speakers have enthusiasm, which is horrible advice. There are 800 million people starving on our planet. Yeah, that doesn't call for enthusiasm. There's something else you're after here. So what I first figured out was, and this is critical for understanding speaking, whether you are a student or an adult, all speaking has 2 very distinct parts. What you do before you speak and what you do as you speak. And it's really critical for developing speakers to understand the distinction. We do a lot of things before we open our mouths, and we do different things as we're speaking. So that's where we start. What do you do before you say a word, and then what do you do as you speak?
Right. So we've got the planning, we've got the preparation that we put into what we're going to say, and then we've got the actual delivery. And it sounds like all of that is teachable, right? There's not any aspect of this that you're saying is innate and just some kids have it and some kids don't. We can teach all of this.
Exactly so. It is all teachable. And that's something else because that is a misconception people have. Some people are good at it, some people are bad. That's true of everything, right? There are kids who are great at math, kids who struggle with math. There are kids who are great spellers, kids who struggle with spelling. There are kids who love to read and are really good at reading. So speaking is no different than any of these other things. Some kids do have more natural talent than others, but all students are teachable. And that's where the framework comes in. Let me explain to you exactly what the skills are. We can figure out where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, And then I can show you how to teach that so that you can improve as a speaker.
Let's get into the building a speech side, the preparation side. And if I had to guess, I would say often we overlook this because we think if the student has, say, written the book report, then that takes care of that. And it sounds like you're saying that's not exactly the case, right? We're not just talking about doing written work and then reading it aloud, right?
That is so good, Justin, because that is something I really bothers me. Teachers think that a speech is a report read out loud. And if you can sort of mutter what you wrote, we'll call it a speech. And if you look at how teachers grade things like book reports or biography presentations or whatever they do, almost all the points are for how you wrote the essay. And very few points are awarded for how well you delivered it, even though the delivery matters more than the writing. I'll explain that. But before we talk, we need to think about the audience. Teachers don't spend enough time on that. We give kids the assignment. They dutifully do what we're asked them to do. The main character is, the secondary character is, the setting is, the main climax is, or the name of the case is, the justices who voted for it were this. The kids are bored to death because any good speech is for an audience. So the first thing I teach them before you say a word, think about your audience. What do they know? What do they need to know? What are they capable of knowing? Think about that because it shouldn't be a teacher checklist. It should be something designed for your classmates, your peers, or whoever the audience is. Second thing, before you ever open your mouth, content. And yes, we give them that, right? We tell them you need the main character, secondary character, name of the case, date of the case. We tell them that. But that's not enough. You need to put in content that will connect with that audience. There's a big difference between, hi, my name is Erik. I'm going to talk about a search and seizure Supreme Court case. And how many of you have cell phones? How many of you would be okay if the principal took your cell phone and went through all of your text messages? Well, my case doesn't involve cell phones, but it does involve someone searching something without permission. It's a Supreme Court case about search and seizure. Oh, so before I ever say anything, I can add content that makes my speech more engaging to my audience? That's one of the things I talk about. Third thing, organization. Before you ever say a word, let's organize your talk. Do you have a great engaging opening? Do you have transitions so we know where you are? Do you have a powerful closing? Because every teacher can identify that kids get up, hi, my name is Erik, blah, 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 and that's my speech. Come on, we can do better than that. Let's teach kids how to organize a speech with a great opening, a great closing, transitions. Before you ever say a word, sometimes you have visual aids. You don't have to. But I give specific lessons about how to design visual aids that are powerful and effective instead of what looks like a haphazard art project. And finally, we talk about appearance because before you say a word, you build your appearance. What should you look like? Now, adults know this. You dress differently for back to school night than you do when you're mowing the lawn on Saturday. But I want kids to know that before you ever say anything, think about the audience, think really well about content and add some things we don't usually add. Organize it well, have powerful visual aids, pay attention to how you should look. If you've taken care of those things, you're ready to talk. But all that has to be done before you ever open your mouth.
I can recall being almost stopped in my tracks a couple of times, by seeing a student who is obviously dressed up for something, right? They've obviously dressed up for some sort of special occasion at school. If you see a 10-year-old wearing a bow tie, probably there's a reason for that. There's something they're going to do. And I feel like maybe we've lost that. I don't know if it's a societal thing where we've just kind of become more casual, but I feel like there's a power in getting kids to maybe dress up a little bit, to maybe take something seriously and see it as kind of a different day. Today is the day I give my presentation, so I'm carrying myself differently, I'm dressing differently. I don't know. Do you think there's something to that?
Absolutely. We absolutely do judge a book by its cover. And so I want kids to know that your appearance matters. You build this before you ever start talking. It'll matter before you go to a job interview. It'll matter before you, as I said, do back to school night. And in my class, it's exactly as you described, Justin. You could look out in the hall and you knew who was presenting that day. We had some, I'll call them major presentations that you had to dress up, which didn't mean a whole lot. You know, it was not that everybody had a suit or a sport coat or something, but you know who was dressed fancy and who was going to present Mr. Palmer's class. And you could look around and say, oh, Justin's presenting, Eric's presenting, Amanda's presenting. You knew. And the next day, other kids would be dressed up. It matters. You're absolutely right.
All right, well, let's talk about the actual delivery, or as you call it, the performance. Why do you call a speech a performance as opposed to just, a presentation or a delivery?
It's a matter of the power of the word. Delivery seems easy. Deliver a letter, deliver a package. But any talk really should be a performance. And I'm talking about any talk. One-to-one, small group, large group, in person, via digital tool, formal, informal. You really should think of it as kind of a performance. When I gave my daughter car keys for the first time when she turned 16, that was kind of a performance. I spent a lot of time, of course, building the talk, but as I was giving Sarah the keys, I was performing. This is pretty serious stuff, and I want people to have that attitude that this is more than casual banter with friends. You are performing because you want to communicate an idea. I can tell you that sometimes people push back, well, performance makes it too scary. And I understand that, but I think the fear of public speaking is because no one ever taught us how to do it. And the fear diminishes when you teach people the skills needed. And it diminishes when you say, hey, performance is fun. There's a reason why they call them plays when you go to a theater. We're having fun here. Like, yes, you're going to get up in front of the entire class, but it's going to be fun. They'll laugh when you want them to laugh. They'll be serious when you want them to be serious. You're going to have fun performing. The nerves will go away. You always start out. I start out nervous. My blood pressure is up before every presentation that I do. I'm sure of it. And I've done hundreds, thousands. But I want people to think of it as a performance. This is more than something else. You're going to have fun doing it.
I think maybe sometimes our empathy goes too far. We think, I don't want my students to be nervous, so I'm not going to put them on the spot. And if I do put them on the spot, I'm going to be happy with whatever comes out of their mouth because they're doing their best. And I know they're nervous. So of course they're mumbling. Of course they're looking at their shoes, so I don't want to traumatize them by giving them, some sort of negative experience here. But you actually talk about teaching students to look calm and confident. Is that possible? You can actually teach students to look confident even if they're nervous?
Yes, but first let me address the point that you made, which is so good. We do treat this differently. We think, you would never say to someone, well, Justin, I know that math is hard for you. You don't like math, so we just won't do math. You would never think of saying that. I know math is hard for you, but I can help you become better at it. And I don't want any more deference paid to speaking. Like, well, I know this is hard for you because public speaking is so hard. I just won't have you do it, or I'll excuse poor performance. Nonsense. Kids are much more capable than we give them credit for. And it's just a matter of showing them what they need to do. So to your point, what do you need to do as a speaker? What do all good speakers do? I broke it down into 6 things, and I wrote this on the chalkboard. Chalkboard? How old is this idea? I wrote it on a chalkboard years ago, and I said, here's what good speakers do. They have poise, they have a voice, they have life in their voice, they have eye contact, they make gestures, they use speed well. Some child in the back of the room looked and said, PV legs. Why, yes. PV legs. My website is pvlegs.com. That caught on. I had kids call me years later saying I was doing a presentation for my college seminar, and I thought about PV legs, Mr. Palmer. It's silly, but it's silly like Roy G. Biv is silly.
So you've got poise, voice, life, eye contact, gestures, and speed. I love that. And for any of our audience members who are too young to know what this is, a chalkboard is a rock that you write on with a different rock that's called chalk. And before markers, we had chalkboards, and they were pretty good. They weren't the best, but
you can Google it and see what it is. Yeah. But now note that those terms are, because people say, well, you're trying to teach them an official way to speak. It's not an official way to speak. These apply to all dialects, all languages. All speakers who are effective have poise. And this encompasses a lot of what teachers say, stand still, hold your head up. All speakers are poised. They appear to be calm and confident. They aren't, but they appear to be. And that means they control the one thing they do, because everybody has one thing they do. Maybe they're flicking the hair out of their eyes or twirling the strings of the hoodie or tugging at their sleeves. We don't teach kids about this. So I can say, let's watch Justin talk about his favorite restaurant. What did you notice that Justin did? Well, he was always tugging at his sleeves. Did you know that? And of course, you didn't. No one ever pointed it out to you before. And now I can make you aware of these things that you do. And the next child will speak and will notice. These don't get cured overnight, but kids are aware of what to look for. They know the things they do that make them seem ill at ease. And bit by bit, incrementally, they get better at controlling this. We get better at avoiding the nervous tics. Because you've built this great talk, and if you are not poised, you're doing some silly thing, you've lost us right away. So all speakers start with poise. And I teach kids, what's the stance that works for you? What's the best way to sit for you where you could be comfortable and poised and not fidgety? And if we had the same language grade after grade, poise in kindergarten looks different than it does in 12th grade. But we would all know poise. Justin, we're working on poise. What's your thing? Oh, I used to tug at my sleeves, but I'm getting a lot better at it. Oh, good. Poise. The second thing is voice, and that encompasses so much. People will say elocution, articulation, enunciation, speak loudly, speak slowly. Voice. Every word heard. That's all I'm after. Every word heard. I don't need to garbage it up with language that kids don't understand. Every word heard. Yes, some kids speak too softly, and we have to tell them we didn't hear every word. Some kids mumble, and we have to say we didn't hear every word. But kids instantly grasp every word heard. Life, the biggest growth area for all speakers, certainly all kids, but for all speakers, you got to have some life in your voice. And sometimes that's enthusiasm. Because we won the soccer match, we're going to the state meet. And sometimes it's not. Because 800 million people are starving on our planet. And I'm not okay with that. And you get that from the life in my voice. Biggest growth area for all kids, life. Eye contact has shown up around the planet. We all know that good speakers look at you. Any talk is a conversation magnified. And when you converse with someone, you look at them. Gestures. Teachers grade gestures, but I never see anybody teach gestures. But yes, hand, body, and facial gestures matter. And speed matters. Don't speak slowly. Use speed well. Sometimes you speed up when it gets exciting. Sometimes you slow down to make a point. But if you look at any speaker anywhere on the planet, whether it's the comedian at the comedy club or the televangelist that has people laughing 1 minute, crying another, or the politician or the actor, they're poised. They have a voice such that you can hear every word. They've got life in their voice. They make eye contact. They gesture well. They use speed well. That's it. That's what it takes to be a great speaker.
Every bit teachable. Now, can I ask about eye contact in particular? Because I think there have been some concerns about the cultural appropriateness of insisting on eye contact and saying, well, that's rude in some cultures. Do we really want to make our students make eye contact? What do you think about that?
I was prepared for that when I started traveling internationally and doing presentations internationally. And I assumed that it would be thought of as inappropriate in some cultures. It hasn't been that way. It has been that way in personal communication, but when I talk about what we'll refer to as public speaking, it's universally recognized that that does require eye contact. And so while in this culture, you may not make eye contact with me when we're speaking conversationally, it does seem to be a thing that we realize that if you're going to be in the world culture, eye contact matters. I like what you said about everything is teachable, because it is. We just haven't done it. If you think of how we teach writing, you've got specific lessons about fragments and run-ons, and you give kids practice in correcting fragments and run-ons. And we have lessons about comma usage, and we give kids practice putting commas after an introductory phrase to separate items in a series. We have all these little mini lessons. We have none of those for the number one language art, speaking, but they're all teachable. For instance, how do I teach gestures? I teach hand gestures, and I'll say, today we're going to learn about emphatic hand gestures. And I'll put a little phrase up on not on the chalkboard. I'll put a little phrase up and I'll say, I need someone to say this. And they'll go, yes, we won. And they'll move their hands. Maybe they'll make a clenched fist, or maybe they'll raise their hand. Yes, we won. And then I'll have someone else do it. They'll have a different gesture, but it'll be effective at showing kids what emphatic hand gestures look like. And I'll say, when you do your book report, I'll look for some emphatic hand gestures. And the next day I'll teach descriptive hand gestures. The dog was real little, but his mouth was real big, and I had bite marks all over my arm. And kids will demonstrate that. And they'll demonstrate it differently. That's the fun of gestures. We don't all do it the same way. I said, well, now you understand emphatic and descriptive hand gestures. I'll look to see some of those in your speech. And when you see them, they may not be smooth. You can tell that the child was seriously thinking. They'll say, yes, we won. Pause. Slap fist into hand. Good, you were thinking about it. That is an emphatic hand gesture. Thank you. It'll become smooth. We'll get better because all teachers now are going to focus on the number one language art, and we'll work on gestures. So I have many lessons for every one of those things, and that's just an example of how I teach gestures.
I know you have a section in the book on digital communications, maybe, virtual interview or a video or a podcast. And if I think about, some of the opportunities that actually are getting some attention these days, certainly student podcasts are, certainly students are interested in becoming YouTubers, becoming influencers, making a career out of being on video on their phones. So there's some awareness out there, but there are also some differences in an electronic medium like that compared to a face-to-face context. What do you see as some of those similarities and differences that we need to be mindful of?
Well, the skills are the same. You still have to build the talk and think about audience, content, organization, visual aids if you put them into your video podcast and appearance. And you still have to think about poise, voice, life, eye contact, gestures, and speed. But to some extent in the digital world, those things are amplified because the digital world will diminish everything you do. If you seem okay in person, you will be dreadfully dull on a small speaker, on a small screen, at someone's cell phone or tablet. And so here we are in an era where speaking skills are showcased like never before. And we have teachers still ignoring them. If you want to spend the longest 2 minutes of your life, listen to your typical student podcast. You can barely get to 2 minutes, and we let it happen because we haven't taught them the skills. So the skills apply, but you need to be extra careful about life. It's got to be over the top. If someone were listening to you in person, they think, wow, you're way out of bounds. Nope, not by the time it comes out on the podcast. It'll sound fine. So the skills apply, but there are some special things to think about, and that's what led to the second edition of the book.
Love it. And I agree completely because, so many school leaders who are interviewing for jobs now have to do a first round that's a virtual screener. Either it's a Zoom meeting or it's pre-recorded and they have to submit the video. And if they don't make it past that round, they're not even going to be invited in for a face-to-face interview. And one of the things I tell people is you really have to overdo the energy. You're going to feel like you're overdoing it. But as you said, the digital medium subtracts so much and makes you look so much more asleep than you would in person. And anybody who's attended some of my job search trainings has heard this story. But many years ago, we had a podcast intro, not the current version, but a previous version recorded. We had an intro recorded by a professional voice actor. And he was a real pro, had done, Ford truck commercials and been on television and things like that. And he sent me 3 different versions, which was more than I asked for. I thought, okay, I only needed one, but I'll listen to all three of them. And the first one was Welcome to Principal Center Radio, and introduce the podcast. And then the second one was Welcome to Principal Center Radio, and it was a lot more amped up. And I thought, okay, this is a little much, but I'm impressed. And then the third one was full on monster truck. Welcome to Principal Center Radio. I thought, whoa, no way. But after I listened to all of them, after we tried all of them in editing and put them on the actual podcast, guess which one we went with?
Monster truck?
Monster truck was the winner by far. It just made sense. Even though out of the blue, it sounded crazy. But in context, in that format, it really worked. So I've never forgotten that.
A great point. And by the way, this leads some people to think, well, not everybody's like that, which is true. Not everybody's like that. There are introverts. There are people who are shy and retiring. Again, there are people who struggle with math. And so you have to work extra hard with them. But everybody can do this. And I'm not asking for everyone to be like a monster truck kind of person. We don't have to be that person, but we do have to add much more when you get in the digital world, and kids are capable of it. They get better.
So the book is Well Spoken, Teaching Speaking to All Students. Erik, if people want to get in touch with you and maybe learn about some professional development opportunities that might be available, where's the best place for them to go?
To what seems like a silly place, pvlegs.com, where you can get more about the strategy. There's some lessons there, some lesson ideas you can download. There are some rubrics that will help kids develop as speakers now that they know what the skills are. pvlegs.com, or contact me at email, Erik_Palmer@comcast.net.
And for school leaders who are interested in improving their own communication skills, check out our previous interview on Erik's other book. Erik Palmer, thank you so much for joining me on Principal Center Radio. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, Justin. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks for listening to Principal Center Radio. For more great episodes, subscribe on our website at principalcenter.com/radio.